around his one-room dwelling. Rain from the day before had soaked through the walls to the inside. Mud dripped from the ceiling with a tedious tat-tat-tat. The smell of wet earth yawned from every crevice after the rainstorm the night before, the dampness seeping under his clothing. What a fine mess for his new wife to come home to. George stomped his foot on a grasshopper, kneading it into the dirt floor. "You're not over Isabel yet." Shrugging into his fringed buckskin coat, Briggs winced at the sound of Isabel's name. He hoped after today he wouldn't hear it again. His gaze searched the dugout for his worn leather gloves. Taking 3 easy strides, he swept them up from the nail keg by the door and tapped them against his thigh. He wondered if he should have shaved. Too late now, he decided. He'd been working since dawn in the cornfield and hadn't realized the time. "You're not listening to me," George went on. "It's only been 3 months, and you're hardly set up for marriage." "I'm set up fine. I have land, and I have a house." He spread his arms wide so the fringe on his sleeves dangled. "What more could I need?" "You call this a house?" George walked to the sod wall and plucked out a long blade of limp brown grass. "You advertise in a city paper for a wife, and you expect her to live here?" Briggs clamped his jaw at the insult. He was proud of what he'd accomplished over the past year. He owned this land and all the corn and wheat planted on it. As soon as the harvest machine came, he'd make a handsome profit off his wheat and rye. "I said I was looking for someone who could handle the prairie. That someone answered, so there's nothing else to talk about. I need help around here. I need a wife. And I'm done sitting alone on my land like the hermit everyone thinks I am, pining away over—" Still uncomfortable speaking her name, he reached up to rub the back of his neck, warm under the blanket of his thick, unruly hair. "You were never one to care what other people thought," George pointed out, a little too perceptively for Briggs' present mood. He took a deep breath, searching for patience. He succeeded only in reminding himself of the ever-present smell of dirt and grass. Everything was so darn wet. "I am over Isabel," he said. "I was over her the moment she took me for a fool and broke our engagement." He turned his back on his brother. He didn't need this, not today. They had a long drive ahead of them, and he had vows to think about. "Look at you," George snorted. "You're covered with dust. You look like you just walked off the field. Why don't you at least borrow one of my suits?" Briggs looked down at his faded denims and shabby leather boots. "I did just walk off the field. This is the way I dress, and your suits would never fit me. You know that." "We could stop off at the clothier." Briggs raised an eyebrow, wishing George would stop making suggestions about his wedding attire. Briggs had never intended the ceremony to be anything more than what it was, a legality. A moment of silence passed while Briggs threw an old gray blanket over the narrow bed and fluffed up the single pillow. Suddenly, his gut wrenched. He was in the habit of living alone. Soon, he'd be sleeping here, sharing his bed with a complete stranger. "You don't have to marry this girl today," George continued. "You don't even know what she looks like." "It's not about looks, George. In fact, a pretty face clouds a man's judgment. What I need is a capable woman who's not so concerned with fancy clothes and hats and all that other stuff women like." Briggs flipped his hair out of his face. "She's going to live out here, miles from town, lighting fires with dry cow dung." George's disapproving gaze swept the room. Then he pushed his gold spectacles further up the bridge of his nose. "It's not too late to change your mind. You could get to know her first, maybe court her a little." "I don't have time to court. I'm 30 years old. Besides, if I felt like courting, I'd court someone here in Kansas, instead of bringing her all the way from, Briggs drew his eyebrows together, struggling to remember which newspaper advertisement she'd answered. "Boston," George finished for him. "You brought her from Boston." "Right, Boston." He took one last look around to make sure everything was in order. It was as good as it was going to get. He reached for his well-worn ivory Stetson and placed it on his head. "Now let's get on the road or we'll be late, and she'll be standing around at the station wondering if she got off in the wrong town." Briggs followed George through the narrow door, watching his brother duck so his gray fedora wouldn't graze the low frame. "I'm sure she'll be wondering that regardless when she sees this place."